You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Last week on the pod, Brendan, we had Tarek Patel join us, fresh off the back of Pro Tour Baltimore. But I didn't get to ask you many questions about the Pro Tour, obviously myself not being there. So I wanted to find out from you, what was your favorite part about PC Baltimore, and maybe a favorite match that you got to either spectate or cast on the weekend?
My favorite match was definitely Michael Fang versus Yuha, which is interesting because I think like post-match, I remember Michael Fang was talking about how he thought he could potentially lose that game. I think from our perspective, it looked like it was actually impossible at some point because of how well the pitch stack was for Michael Fang in his favor. That being said, there was a comment on our YouTube video, actually, because I think I mentioned this in a previous pod. They talked about the way Yuha could have won that game. It actually goes back to like the earlier turns and just a potentially like a different usage of remembrance as well as tumble time. They talked about maybe the remembrances were used a bit early, and I think that potentially in that case Yuha could have won. But I think from our scenario, it did look like it was very kind of like mastercraft by Fang till the end game, where it was basically scripted at that point because we knew both decks, but it was still great to watch because I feel like if you're interested in high level Flesh and Blood, that's probably one of the best matches you can watch. It just shows pitch stacking, card economy, game plans, dynamic, both players adapting, etc. It was really a joy.
Yeah, I mean, a classic 1990 matchup. So both players were locked to win, surely, Brendan. No, great. I mean, the other thing at the Pro Tour Baltimore weekend, of course, was the Calling Baltimore, the largest amount of players registered for event in Flesh and Blood history. I think you'd know better than me, around 900 players, I think.
914, I believe.
Yeah, so a huge event in the end, won by Merrick Kemp on Dash. And while we did focus a lot on Baltimore and the PT last week, on the pod, this week, episode 108, we are going to be talking a bit more about the Calling. While the PT was happening in a split format event, on the other side, the Calling was happening pure classic constructed, 900 odd players, 16 rounds, I want to say it was, or 15 rounds, I think it was. And we're going to dive into what happened at this event, look at some of the decks that did well, the top 8, because it is very interesting. It's a little bit different to the PT, and I think being a pure classic constructed format gives us a lot of indication of where we're heading with Road to Nationals starting, well, for some regions, Road to Nationals starting this weekend, and for other regions, Road to Nationals starting next weekend.
Yeah, I think both tournaments have their drawbacks when it comes to data. The argument against the PT is that it's split format, right? And draft sort of throws a wrench in the final result and how we land on the top decks that make the top 8. In the Calling, you can make the argument that the best players in the world aren't competing, but I still think that the Calling is probably a better thing to look at for a class constructed data set, because there was so many rounds, because there were so many players. And I also think that just due to the sort of fluidity of that class constructed meta, like the PT meta, we had talked about it a lot when we were at the Pro Tour. We're like, if we had a tournament next weekend, the meta might not look anything like this. And I mean, that's kind of what happened in the Calling. Lexi was still a popular deck, but you saw more counter to Lexi and people being prepared for it. We talk about like, Lexi was the best deck of the Pro Tour, and people be like, yes, I think I saw it come. The truth is like the rhetoric was really around old him pretty much until the last week, and didn't really switch to Lexi about 40 hours before. So I think that there was a significant amount of players at the Pro Tour that didn't have enough time to properly adapt and try to counter what ended up being the meta representation at the Pro Tour.
And I would still argue that Ultim was the story of the whole weekend, which we'll talk a bit more about as well as we get into this pod. The other thing as well, that argument I've heard before, the best 64 players weren't playing in the Calling. It's just not true. Like I there were so many good players traveling to this event, more than you would normally have traveling to a standard Calling in North America. And yes, some of those players were definitely in top 64. Some of those players didn't make it into day 2, and instead played the Calling. It was a split format. Maybe draft didn't go their way. Maybe they didn't pick the deck that maybe they should have, or made the better call for the PT. Ended up in the Calling in day 2. So while there's kind of this whole idea of the top 64 players aren't playing this Calling, it's just not true, really. So I'll argue that.
Hayden, have you ever played a Calling?
Have I ever played a Calling?
A Pro Tour Calling.
No, I'm always in day 2.
Yeah,
buddy.
exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's like, nah, I've played a calling, so obviously some greats can be there.
Well, I mean, just look at this top 8. I mean, obviously Merrick Kemp going and winning the week before was top 8ing at Battle Hardened. We've got Matt Rogers in there in that top 8. Dave Lynn, who top 8 of the calling here in Auckland. Zach Bunn, of course, Z Bunn.
What did he top 8 a Road to Nationals or something somewhere?
I heard he's lost a lot of win-ins, so. Your week in Flesh and Blood. Obviously it's it's great for the audience. Your week in Flesh and Blood. You're back from PT Baltimore. Road to Nationals on the horizon. Are you going to be playing some Road to Nationals? I assume people at this point. I heard on the broadcast multiple times that you're permanently retired. Do you want to dispel that theory and tell us about your week in Flesh and Blood and your upcoming plans for Flesh and Blood?
I mean, I don't know who said that, but those people are wishful thinking. I think that they want to move out and make some space for other people to win some tournaments. No, I'm actually going to be in Pittsburgh the first weekend. I'm going to be at the Realm Games Invitational. I believe it's a 5K. Then after that, probably I was planning on it. The only sort of wrench in that is that the Reaper Game Store, which is the game store I usually play at, the one that I can consistently get into, I know the owner, etc. Which, trust me, it sounds funny right now, but it's hard to get into some of these over here. That one is happening the same weekend as Pittsburgh. So after that, I'm gonna have to find a store that I can get into. A lot of the stores around me tend to sell out privately and before they even go public on listing. I do think I'll probably travel up to Oklahoma to see, Road to National, previous Road to National top 8er Zach Bunn, and go meet those boys for a weekend of Oklahoma Road to Nationals, because we like to sort of go up there. We go to Tulsa, then we go down to Edmond for a day. And yeah, it's a good time. They might come to Dallas. If they come to Dallas, if they can get in, I'll definitely be in that Road to Nationals. I can't let them come take a trophy from my home turf.
Well, Tim Bunn, actually, Zach's brother, kept telling me that you were dodging the Oklahoma ProQuest seasons and Road to National seasons in the last 2 years. So, and that's not my words; that's someone else's words. So I'm just saying. But anyway, also I'm gonna put a plea out on behalf of Brendan here. Community icon Brendan Patrick from the Texas area, the Dallas Fort Worth area. Get him into a Road to Nationals. I want to see this guy play some Road to Nationals this season. I got a couple of decks for him to play.
Yeah, and please don't force me to have a part-time job asking you for a spot too, because that's what my last Road to Nationals was like. It's like every single day I was like, huh, you help me put it on the website? Like, nope, not yet. Put it on the website? Nope, not yet. I'm okay, sold out. I was like, oh, great. I remember there was one, I did get a call like an hour before on one of them, and someone was like, hey man, there might be a spot, and I was like, hour drive for might be a spot, and I'm good. But yeah, I'm planning on it. And there's also going to be some, ideally we'll get some US events. I'm going to be also working the Realm Games Salt Lake City and Columbus events. So I'll be there. And if there are any sort of battle hardens near me that I can play that aren't Realm Games, I'll be in those for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brendan, I'm not semi-retired. And this week I started testing for both Singapore coming up in 4 weeks' time, or less than 4 weeks' time, and Road to National season, again, as we said, starting next weekend. So started to get some games in, played a few of the decks from, that did well across the calling and PT at Baltimore, just to get a feel of kind of what people ended up bringing to the event. So it's been good place to start, getting excited to play some Road to Nationals. I was, watching the broadcast last weekend. All I wanted to do was play Flesh and Blood. So I'm excited.
That's how I felt. Yeah, as well. Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I think you and I had talked about in a pod in the lead up to the Pro Tour, was that like, we weren't really feeling the class constructed meta. And I think just like, our general just hype for Flesh and Blood was down a little bit because our team wasn't going to the Pro Tour. It was kind of an atypical moment for us. And I would say that going to the Pro Tour, experiencing that energy just like totally reignited sort of my interest in competitive Flesh and Blood, both competing, but also casting, of course. So yeah, I'm up for it.
Yep. I mean, I definitely am. Let's get into the news. Speaking of Road to Nationals, so if you've been living under a rock, Road to Nationals kicks off this coming weekend for Europe, UK, Hong Kong, and Singapore. That's due to the callings that sit respectively, basically taking a week out of the Road to Nationals season. So LSS have extended the season, and it now kicks off this weekend. So just be aware if you are in those regions, you might well have Road to Nationals near you this weekend. For the rest of the world, US, Australia, New Zealand, South America, other parts of the world. Road to National season is going to be kicking off the following weekend on the 20th. So I know that's when my first event is happening. Make sure you go to fabtcg.com, use the event locator, find an event near you. Brendan is crying on the pod right now if you're on video.
Dude, I'm dying of allergies. Oh my God. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but as soon as it starts to warm up here in Texas, it's just been so brutal for me, man. Yeah, the audio listener is like, what the hell is this segue? Yeah, I've been, my eyes are killing me.
It's not a segue. No. You can see if you're on video right now, we're in the inverse. Usually Brendan's, living in sort of a cold environment. The weather's completely shifted. I've got my jersey on, Brendan, as you can see, the hoodie on. Brendan's got allergies. He's crying. Anyway, Road to National season kicks off. Good luck to all those playing. We did get a banned and suspended announcement, of course, right on cue. Yep. Just as we finished recording the pod, about an hour after we finished recording the pod last week with Tarek, as is tradition on Arsenal Pass, that the announcement drops. We could push the pod back an hour, but if we push back the pod an hour, Brendan, what would happen?
They would just wait another hour. What do you mean?
Yep, exactly. Yep. So the announcement happened. No changes to Classic Constructed, which is a lot of what we theorized. I know there's been a lot of discussion around the kind of reasoning for this. I mean, I think it's reasonably straightforward. We saw a pretty good representation at Pro Tour Baltimore. The most played deck was not the deck that won the event. We saw, Drome Eyes, we saw Ultims, we saw Azalea still in there. So I think LSS feel pretty good right now about the metagame, and they've said as much in this announcement.
Yeah, I know there's some people that would like some bans. I think that every single time we come up to a ban and suspended announcement that has been scheduled, a lot of people do talk about having change rather than no change, but I do feel like this scenario in particular is one where I believe that no changes was warranted. Despite Lexi performing well, being represented as much as it was in the Pro Tour, I think that deck has some bad matchups that just didn't show up because people were not expecting it to be that played, to be honest. Also, I mean, honestly, the biggest argument against Lexi is that its matchup spread is so good, right? It does have some bad matchups. For you to bring a deck that has a genuinely a great matchup into Lexi, you're going to be taking a risk with some of the other matchups. We saw that with Tao's deck. It was absolutely dismantling Lexi's at the tournament. But, I mean, that Oldhim matchup, no thank you.
No thank you. So there we have it. No changes in Classic Constructed. Blitz, on the other hand, Brendan, get excited because Living Legend status has been attained by Icelander and Ultim, and Winter's Whale leaves with Ultim, and of course, as we all know, with Icelander, Kraken's Aether Vein leaves the format.
Yeah, call an ambulance, but not for me. Kraken's Aether Vein leaves. Yeah, obviously not a great weapon. Let's get into the crazy stuff, though. So,
well, just first of all, I definitely thought Waning Moon was the associated weapon with Icelander. Turns out it's not, which is hilarious.
Yeah. So
but where you go, talk about it.
Yep.
Drone of Brutality.
Drone of Brutality moves from banned to legal. Aether Ice Vein moves from suspended to legal. Crown of Seeds moves from suspended to legal. Hypothermia moves from suspended to legal. So the last three I said are just a result of Icelander becoming Living Legend as well as Oldhim. Drone of Brutality. Yeah, I'm going to tell you guys, that card, it's a good card in Flesh and Blood, but it's going to suck in Blitz. I genuinely don't think it's going to do much of anything. Hayden, do you think?
I think it's going to do something. Yeah, I mean, the card's powerful. How good it will be is going to depend on how the format shakes out. I mean, the problem is that Kano looks really good. You should be. I'm assuming you'll be playing a lot of Blitz because Kano looks really good in this format. And what does that mean for Drone? Too slow, probably.
Drone of Brutality, modern day Flesh and Blood, a 2-for-6 that blocks for 2. I just don't know if it makes the cut anymore. I don't know if you, and I genuinely don't think you can attrition people out like that in Blitz without something like Oldhim that's using Crown of Seeds, as well as just a ridiculous suite of cards in order to be able to actually survive. I think every other hero in Blitz just falls over a long period of time, which is what a Drone of Brutality is. It's for the second and third cycle. That's where you're getting your value. I don't know. I don't see it in Blitz. I could be terribly wrong, right? It's a recursive card, which is just, those are the kind of things that break card games, right?
You love breaking core tenets of the game. I thought you'd be all over this being back in the format.
I mean, I'm hyped. Don't get me wrong. I think that this is, kind of a wimp move by LSS. Just unban the damn card in Class Constructed. That's what we need. That might actually do something. That might actually do something.
Please don't do that. Not unless you also give me Scalata and Ball Lightning.
Dude,
I'm not interested.
Yes. I said that on Twitter to Brian saying he talked about Drone of Brutality because I can't wait for it to make splash in Blitz, which I think he was memeing because he also thinks the card sucks. But I was like, dude, unban Scalata. Please, please. I want to feel something again.
Just sack up. What it feels. Yeah, so there we go. That's the changes in Blitz. I mean, as Brendan said, Hypothermia, Eighth Eyes, Fang, Crown of Seeds. No real relevancy apart from potentially Crown of Seeds for a Briar in the format, and Hypothermia maybe for Lexi. Ultimate Pit Fighters also had some changes where Go Bananas is now banned in official events only. Feel free to still play it at kitchen table.
That's whack. That's whack. That's an awesome card. I can't believe they banned that.
Yeah, I mean, is what it is. I mean, they've done this with some of is it Yorick that's also banned in these events? So I think it's more of it's been cited as a pay-to-win card, and obviously they're going to have official events for UPF, so I think they just want to tidy that up a little bit. Drone. The one thing about Drone that's quite interesting, just going back to that quickly, is the price that I've seen this card fit. This could be a bit of an issue because obviously it's short printed. It was available in alpha print, but then it's only available in certain print runs of Unlimited because it was banned and then removed from subsequent print runs. So it is definitely short printed. So I'm hoping that actually it isn't going to be good because that would be a little bit unideal for the game, I think.
Yes. So James actually replied to a tweet. I can't remember whose tweet it was, saying that, it should still be no problem to get because there was a large amount of them printed in that first wave of Unlimited. But yeah, I don't think that they would unban Drone if they thought that Drone was going to do what Drone used to do. Because that's a toxic experience. So I think that they genuinely believe that card will not be good.
I mean, Drone wasn't even as good in Blitz. It was just because Ira was so dominant in that format. But actually, the format after, I don't think Drone would have even had the same impact that it did the format that got banned. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
Ira mirrors, yes, that card is going to be good. With these pseudo control Ira mirrors, yes, Drone of Brutality is good in that format. But you add Kano, modern day aggro decks, etc. No way.
Yeah, I mean, you've already got a recursive block one card in the form of your boots for Kasai. So, I mean...
True, and that card is broken. Kasai too good.
It's true. All right, let's move on. Calling's happening this month. We have Antwerp happening on May 19th. I know there's a few people traveling to that. Tarek on the pod last week was talking about heading out to that one. I believe he may well be. I think he sorted his passport issue that he talked to us about. Singapore is happening June 9th. I will be there. Looking very much forward to that. There is also on the Friday... there's a Monarch sealed event. I can't remember what it's called. It has a witty name, and James White is playing. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to meeting a bunch of people in Singapore as well. I had a lot of fun last time out in Singapore prior to Lille. So see those of you that will be there.
Yep. Well, honestly, that's one that I would want to go to. Maybe it's a little too short notice at this point, but I would love. I'd love to go to Singapore in June. Anyway, we have some deck techs and deck guides coming up on the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel, as well as the Patreon with their associated sideboard guide and the tips and tricks, everything you need to know to pick it up and be successful at your local road to nationals. First one's with Brody Spurlock. A few other people queued up as well, but haven't recorded yet, so I don't want to drop any names. So be sure to keep a lookout for that if you're looking for a deck for the upcoming road to national season or calling.
Mm-hmm. We've had a couple of weeks hiatus from limited time only over the Pro Tour. I was also traveling, but we do have a new episode dropping this week, actually with PT finalist, Pro Tour Baltimore finalist, Yuha, who obviously played Dromai, also was one of the 6-0 drafters at Worlds. So really excited to have Yuha come on and talk about, the experience at Pro Tour Baltimore plus as well, just learnings and moving forward into Road to National season. And we've also got a few guests that you'll probably know the names of coming up over the next few weeks for limited time only.
So if you make the semifinals, are you considered a finalist? Semifinalist. Yeah, because U-Haul lost in the semifinals, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just didn't know. I was all discombobulated.
As a joke more. I was mostly making a joke when you said that you considered a finalist. I said semi. But anyway. Let's move on. Command and Cookout time, Brendan. If you do want to get your questions in for Command and Cookout, please send them through to arsenalpass@gmail.com, or you can post them up on the YouTube comments below this video. Let us know it's a Command and Cookout question. That's where our great Command and Cookout question came from a couple of episodes ago. This one is an email entrant. We do also have on our Patreon Discord, you can drop a question in there if you're an Arsenal Pass Patreon. How does LSS fix the brute class in classic constructed format? Brendan, that's the title line I saw of this question. I thought we have to discuss this one. So the question comes from Nate S and says, as a class, Brute feels woefully left behind. A quick look at tournament top 8 results and Living Legend board will show that Brute is one of the worst performing classes, if not the worst. I will point out, Brute did win Calling San Jose, but Brute's core principle of vanilla damage and no on-hit effects means it cannot disrupt an opponent's game plan, except by bringing their life total to 0. This means that opponents can simply take the 6 to 8 damage that a Brute presents on a typical turn and swing back with an unhindered 4 to 5 card hand. With a few exceptions, swing big, the math on Brute cards also seems generally bad. In fact, the most successful Brute decks, such as Chandler Toe's San Jose Calling list, there you go, Nate does call that out, stray away from using many Brute cards in favor of generics. Brute also seems to possibly be held back by the existence of scabskin leathers, with card design always having to take into account the possibility of extra action points on any given turn. As a result, go-again options are very limited, and Brutes struggle to use 4 or 5 card hands. Bloodosh Bellows seems to be the only card propping Brute up at the moment, with most decks play patterns consisting of stalling out until you draw the card. From an increasing forlorn Brute main, Nate S. PS, please don't say the solution is rolling dice and more no-block cards. Brendan, what's the solution?
Oh, I don't think it's rolling dice or no block cards, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, Brute is interesting. I think we saw it have success, obviously, in Blitz to an extent at the World Championships. It did win the Calling, that's a hard Calling to win. Like we're about to talk about the Calling after this most recent Pro Tour. The Calling at the World Championships also very, very hard to win, and you know, Brute did take that down. I do think that Brute in modern day Flesh and Blood, which at least until Outsiders was consisted of a lot of decks running these super powerful generics and kind of doing a lot of samey stuff. Like Brute felt like a deck that couldn't do that, right? Like it needed a lot of synergy, it needed to play a lot of class cards and sort of build around those Bloodosh Bellows turns, which felt like they had sort of a cap on power level and couldn't keep up generally with like the power level of what the tier 1 meta decks were doing. I think right now, looking at Brute and then looking at something like Codex of Frailty, it just feels not the same, to be honest. I do think that the on-hit effect that Brute does have access to, which is on-hit you die, is maybe a little bit weaker in modern day Flesh and Blood, especially in the context of it probably being just like quantitatively behind the curve of some other decks, some of the other top performing decks like Lexi. Hayden, I want to ask you, because you're the Brute guy. How would you fix it? Like, because I know that you wouldn't hate. I know Hayden's solution is not rolling dice. It's probably not. It's probably not no block cards. Do you think that we just need something like a Ranger treatment to Brute? Because Ranger was a class that kind of sucked ass. Like Lexi, okay, right, but Azalea just dog water, and then you get one expansion of cards, and now they have like Lace with Blood Rod, Codex of Frailty, like all this stuff that's just ridiculous. Does Brute need that same treatment? There's one Brute card that I have some faith in, which is Berserk. I think that card could potentially be nuts, but we probably don't want to pigeonhole Brute to just being some sort of linear combo deck, which is what that would be.
I mean, Berserk is on my list, and if you don't know what the list is, I spoke about that on maybe episode 90 something, the list of cards that could be broken. Of course, Berserk is definitely on there. I mean, we do have Codex for Brute. It's Codex at home. It's Cadaverous Contraband. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh God, I haven't played that card since Arcane Rising Limited.
I think the thing with Brute, so I do agree, rolling dice, no block cards, I don't think they're the true solution. I think some of those things are relevant to the class and will always be. Scabskin Leathers is a really powerful piece of equipment. But of course, what is really powerful about Flesh and Blood, and we talk about these decks that do well at events and defined formats, is consistency. And of course, rolling dice isn't consistent. Taking away an axis on which a card can be used in the form of defensive value reduces consistency. It enables, or it means that you can't utilize your cards in one particular fashion, which is really important in Flesh and Blood. So those two things, I think, are detrimental to making Brute sit in these top echelons of decks in any given format. Where I think, Brennan, you said Berserk. I think the other thing that what Brute potentially needs is a talent treatment or a hero text box that is going to help in a big way. I think that is, there are some powerful cards. We just, there is the swing bigs. There is Intimidate itself is a really powerful mechanic, and obviously, in conjunction with Reinar's text box, you can do some powerful things. Intimidate is also a completely non-interactive mechanic, right? So if you power into what Intimidate can do, you give more above rate cards to what a Reinar deck could look like. More effective swing bigs, more ways that discard and then give you above rate sort of effects, then now you're putting into play this mechanic that is just non-interactive. And people will say, ice is non-interactive. Well, you can pay the resource. Intimidate, what can you do? So outside of maybe damage prevention. So I think that is like a big part of it. They've got to be careful around that. But we can take a different track. We can move across to something else. There is good brute cards around. Maybe yes, we do need some more good brute cards and cards that don't necessarily rely on intimidate, rolling dice, or having no defensive value. And then what can we do with a hero text box? So a really relevant hero ability that can utilize some of the core tenets of brute, whether it be 6 powers, etc. Or a talent treatment that is going to allow. Because you look at some of the heroes that I think traditionally had weaker sort of card pools. Some of the hero abilities have really obviously helped with those, I think. So, I mean, Runeblade obviously has a really great pool of cards, but all of those hero abilities on those cards are really strong as well. So that would be kind of my first solution of where LSS could potentially look at Brute. But I think Intimidate is it's really hard for them to touch on what Reinar and the Intimidate mechanic is, because it can be potentially just immediately busted.
Yeah, it's funny because I think Intimidate is sort of like Dominate at home, right? Like it sucks until you have a critical maximum of it and then you intimidate like most of the cards in their hand, right?
Well, then you're not playing the game.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Let's be real. Everybody wants to play that version of Flesh and Blood. At least everybody on this podcast wants to play that version of Flesh and Blood.
That's true.
But yeah, the rolling dice thing I think is the particularly wrong direction to go with Brute. I really don't like the design of KO. I would hate to see that sort of bleed into class constructed and be the Brute solution. No block cards I'm more okay with, because a lot of aggro decks in Flesh and Blood I see as already having no block cards. They have these cards that you almost never block with. It's sort of changed with this new meta, but in past metas, things with Briar, there's just like never a reason to block with a red snatch, right? Unless you're literally going to die. So I'm okay with no block, but I would like to see more things like Berserk. I want to be doing cool things rather than just pushing numbers and trying to intimidate 4 times. One card I do really like, though, is Barraging Beatdown. I understand how uninteractive and kind of broken it is when you have a lot of them, but I do like the interaction with Barraging Beatdown and like Barraging Beatdown, pitch a card, swing your club. I think that asks your opponent a really interesting question every time, which is, are you willing to trade 2 cards for my 1 card and a weapon? And you're sort of, it has been in the past, at least in the Lightning Briar meta. I remember looking at it because as a deck that was potentially good against Lightning Briar, because Lightning Briar couldn't answer that question, right? Couldn't just block with 2 cards. The output would just simply be kind of low. So I don't know. I would like to see more stuff like Berserk. I would like to see more with, I don't know, maybe no block cards is okay with me, but it's a hard question. It's a hard question to answer, to be honest. And I do think the Brute is next. I think that
don't tease me.
They're next because Ranger got their day. Everybody knows Brute's had a rough time for a while now.
I will say, just on Barraging Beatdown, the interesting thing about that card, right? So here's a scenario: 2-card hand. You've got your yellow pitch or even your blue pitch, and you've got your red Barraging Beatdown, and you've got your club sitting in your arsenal and your weapon zone. Come in for an either 8 or 4, yeah, threatening to say, give me 2 cards or here's 8 damage. Let's compare that to something like Command and Conquer, right? Where you say, give me 2 cards or I take your arsenal. It's quite different, right? It's quite a different proposition. One hand, Lexi can go, oh, I have to take 2 extra damage. Okay, here's my 6-card hand, as opposed to, oh, if I don't block this, I lose my 2 cards, so here's 2 cards from my hand to block it out. You know what I mean?
I didn't even think about it like that. Wounded Bull is already 2-card 8, but you don't need the Barraging Beat.
I mean, yeah, you do get to utilize your weapon a bit better, I guess, so it gives you off turns. But anyway, it is that sort of interaction is quite a cool way, because we see Ultims doing this all the time with threatening 2 or 3-card hands that present damage and asking a question or just taking cards from the opponent. But on-hit effects are what take cards from an opponent, unfortunately, not just damage. And that's kind of what Nate is saying, is that damage is damage, and it can be a bit more linear than it looks like, to be honest, a card like Barrage and Beatdown.
Do you think that on-hit discard could be added to the brute flavor of cards in a talent expansion?
Yes.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Like if anything is going to be powerful and it's going to make sense for a brute, I think on-hit discard is something that isn't fully explored in any other class right now that we could add to brute potentially.
Might have to be random discard though. The brute flavor.
Random. Yeah. I think that's fine. It's still very powerful, right?
50% chance you discard a card. 50% chance they discard a card.
I'm out.
All right. Great Commander Cookout question there from Nate S. Again, if you do want to get your questions in, drop them down in the YouTube comments. You can email us. If you're a patron, you can jump on the Discord and drop it in. Feel free to tweet at us, whatever you want to do. Main topic of the pod, Brendan. Let's talk about Calling Baltimore, the largest Flesh and Blood event to date. And let's talk about the learnings we can take away from this as we are on the eve of Road to National starting for a lot of regions in the world and more the following weekend. What, I guess, first of all, was kind of, you were there, right? So just give me kind of your impressions of what this calling was. Like, I had heard that the atmosphere was, first of all, amazing. I'd heard that, this felt like a really important calling as well.
Yeah, first reaction was, holy hell, there was a lot of rounds of Swiss. There was a lot of rounds of Swiss. Obviously, 900 plus players in a class constructed meta. I didn't get the sort of the initial breakdown of the meta, like of the entrance. I only have top 8. But from what I understand, people were taking learnings from the Pro Tour. Pro Tour started playing out day 1, day 2, trying to adjust to that a bit. And I think we saw that play out into top 8 as well. But like we talked about at the top of the pod, if you're going to look at a data set to evaluate this class constructed meta off to try to predict for your Road to Nationals, I would sooner look towards the calling than the Pro Tour, I believe, because I think that due to how fluid the meta was leading into the Pro Tour, the calling is a better representation of players having full knowledge and adapting to sort of this resurgent, or this surge of Lexi that happened at the PT.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a few facts, I guess, about the calling. So it was 13 rounds. As you say, the amount of players in the end, I was going to... what have I done? You said around 900 players, right? In the end. In terms of meta breakdown, so Alex is actually, this amazing live blog that was being run during the weekend provided us with some meta analysis, which is great. So in terms of the overall class constructed meta, moving from Pro Tour to the calling, Lexi, Ultim, Dromai continued to be the 3 most played heroes at the event. But there was a lot more representation of, the fringe heroes like Azuri. So in the PT, I want to say we saw was it 5 to 10 Azuri? I'd have to go back and double check. But it wasn't.
It was 6. I believe it was less than Kano, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So a lot more of, obviously, and as you'd expect with the calling, I mean, it's an open event. You'd expect generally a wider. We always say this when we talk about open events versus invite-only events. Generally, a wider array of heroes, of strategies, people taking punts. It's a different, I guess, it's a different buy-in, right? People aren't necessarily
you can have role players in the calling. It's much less likely in something like the Pro Tour. It definitely still happens. Mansant was on Brew, but in the calling, you're going to have a lot of people to just come and bring their deck, the deck they've been playing for a while, and they're not too concerned if everybody's freaking out because Lexi was, the most played deck or put the most into top 8. They're just going to play their Viserai deck, Zach Button,
and do well. So in terms of other heroes played, Azuri was quite highly played, but had a really poor conversion into day 2. But there were some other decks that did really well. So Dash, Briar, Katsu had really good representation and converted well into day 2. So from an aggressive side, which is really interesting to see. We also saw Phi, Bravo, Azalea, and then Icelander represented. And then there was one legend on Arachne who made a day 2. So congrats to that individual. So yeah, I mean, in terms of what we saw in top 8, obviously very, very interesting. In the meta sort of breakdown, similar to PT, and then also quite interesting. And then top 8. So let's talk about top 8. You had a Dash, a Lexi, a Viserai, an Azalea, 2 Lexis, Viserai, Azalea, and then 3 Ultims made up the top 8. So no Dromai in the top 8 of the calling comparative to what we saw on PT. Do you have any thoughts about why maybe we saw no Dromai in this top 8, Brendan?
Yeah, I think that there's only a handful of players in the world that can actually top a tournament with Dromai. The rest of the people are sort of bound to lose. It seems like. I mean, we've been talking about the pod forever. It was even an issue with Prism. It's just like people who play that deck tend to lose, but then there's this very small subset of players that just takes it and continues to win, and they tend to be the same players. It's not that I don't know if it's because the deck is so technically challenging right now, but I think it's also because, when you look at a modern Dromai deck, the build variations are quite vast, right? You see big Dromai, big dragon Dromai, you see red line Dromai, you see some of these even more defensive Dromais. Like, yeah, I'm just not sure that everybody who's playing Dromai is on the correct build for the current meta scenario they're in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously we saw some players, like you said, who are known Dromai players doing well at the PT, and some that maybe weren't as well known as well. So, but had obviously a lot of experience with the hero. I think that is somewhat true in my experience. I think that it is a hero that there are so many different dynamic lines of play and time periods where you do need to have dynamic play lines up your sleeve to make. But also, I think the other flip side is, and I'm going to get burnt for this, I still feel that Dromai has some worse matchups than people maybe perceive. I think the deck is better than people thought. I know Tarek said the same. I mean, I've always thought Dromai is reasonable, but is it top 3 deck in the format? My view is it's not. Unless it's purely in the hands of maybe, like you say, these other specialists. And even then, I feel like maybe if they were playing a different deck, they'd be doing just as well, if not better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting spot. I mean, honestly, in the Pro Tour, I was surprised to see 2 top 8. I know for a while it looked like we weren't going to potentially have the Dromai sneak into the top 8, and then we had Yuha and Mara get in. I was surprised. I honestly didn't predict that. I predicted maybe 1 getting in, but the 2 I was impressed by. I think with Dromai, there's an extent to which I'm just okay with not knowing, right? I don't fully understand why some people are having so much more success than other people, and the overall conversion rate of the deck seems to be so bad on the aggregate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess my question is, are we going to continue to see that heading into Road to National season, do you think, or will people take a lot of learnings from this top 8 potentially?
No, I think we're going to see more people show up with Dromai in the Road to National seasons that would have previously if it didn't have these performances at the Pro Tour. I think despite the calling being potentially a better representation of the Classic Constructed meta, people are actually going to look at the Pro Tour as a way to try to predict their Road to Nationals. And I do think a lot of people look at those Dromai decks, probably look at Mara's deck specifically and try to pick up that. I think Mara had a bit more of a unique build that we hadn't seen maybe on coverage yet. And it is just, it's more aggressive. And I think that the larger group of players in Flesh and Blood will tend to lean towards these aggressive decks when possible. So I actually think there's going to be a lot of Dromai on sort of weekend 1 of Road to Nationals.
I mean, Dromai has been consistently in the top 3 most played decks at every kind of covered event we've seen in North America, at least, for this past sort of 8-week period since the release of Outsiders. We saw the Chicago Brawl, where it was, I think, 3rd most played. It was it 1st or 2nd most played at the Battle Hardened, and then obviously, at the PT as well. So, and in the Calling alongside it, which that's a crazy one to me. Like, that's the one that I guess stands the test, is that if you go into an open event like the Calling and Dromai is still top 3 most played, first thing tells me is super popular, right? Mm-hmm. Second thing is people are super committed to it, and third thing is people want to play it, and people are going to continue to play it, I think.
Yeah, I think it's also it's definitely a unique game experience that you can't capture with any other deck. So the people that play that deck, there's not really something there's not another deck to sub that experience out with, right? It's just Dromai that plays like that builds up the permanents. You could say Dash, but I don't think it's the same thing.
Well, speaking of unique play patterns, I guess, and play experiences, let's, like you say, Dash. Let's talk about Dash, because Dash ultimately wins the Calling after having a pretty average time at the PT. I know day 1 we saw a player like Alan Lau, who I think was undefeated on day 1, was playing Dash, but not something we saw in the PT top 8. Then ultimately, Merrick Kemp winning the Calling on Dash, and as we know, had a pretty reasonable conversion into day 2. So what's kind of your thought on Dash winning the Calling? Did you see that coming? Was there sort of any talk about that happening at the event hall?
Definitely not. I think Dash was looked at as somewhat of an unplayable deck going into the PT meta. I think a lot of people were directing that energy towards the Tree Frog Dash deck just because it's matchup spread. People don't believe it to be great, right? Maybe you can beat these sort of defensive Oldhim decks, which honestly didn't really exist at the PT. But ultimately, just not a well-rounded deck. The deck that we saw win is not that. It is not Tree Frog Dash. Looks to be more mid-range, right? Does have the item package, but at the same time has this sort of aggressive package. We see 9 T-Bones, 9 Throttles, as well as 6 0 to 60s. So kind of standard there. And of course, the 9 Zipper hits. So yeah, I mean, did we see it coming? Short answer is absolutely not. I was very surprised. The first thing I did when I heard Dash won the tournament is I went and looked at the top 8 bracket because I was like, what sort of gem pairings did they get to be able to get to the finals? But I do believe they did beat one Oldhim because that was my biggest question. Was like, okay, if they're slapping around the aggro decks, which is this deck was beating Lexi's, then maybe it just got really lucky and dodged all the Oldhims to get the top 8 and then had the lucky run. But not the case. It looks like it was able to beat everything and was prepared for sort of every kind of deck that could have showed up. So honestly, how do you where do you go from here? Like, is this deck the truth? I mean, you create a tournament of 900 players right after the Pro Tour, some of the best players in the world. This deck comes out on top. And a deck that I think that if we had a big, like a sort of a top 8 prediction card, I don't think anybody would have put, or between me and you, we would not have put a Dash in the top 8. I think most people wouldn't either.
I don't think we did put one on our top 8, that's for sure. So I guess when you look at, this list in general looks, fairly standard. I mean, there's some interesting inclusions, right? Like only playing 6 0 to 60, actually, no yellow 0 to 60, instead opting to play the full gambit of throttles. There's Remembrance in here, playing Command and Conquer. There's kind of a split of defense reactions, but then the rest is, as you say, kind of pretty standard. I think the thing with Dash is that it's never, while we said it maybe wasn't a great meta call for the PT, I stand by that. I think that it's never a terrible call because you always have the ability to win matches into some of the best decks in the format. So if we take Lexi, for example, you can, potentially race in the aggro, in an aggro mirror, basically. I've been playing some games this week actually at that matchup because I was really interested to see if Dash feels like it should be favored in that matchup. And I would say it feels close, but I would probably prefer to be on the Lexi side of that matchup. It feels like you have more play on that side of the matchup once you've sort of tested the matchup. But cards like Combustible Courier are particularly good in that, having some on-hit effects. If you can land Magnetic Shockwave early with, conjunct with the T-Bone and just destroy the New Horizon early, then you're in a really good position to win that game. That's kind of the key to that matchup, I think. So that's really interesting. But then, even against Dash, right, you can, against Oldhim, you can assemble your Induction Chambers and Plasma Purifiers really early and just roll through with your defense reactions and just take control of the game. Like, I've seen that happen a reasonable amount. I was struggling to find that to be able to happen consistently in my testing, but it definitely can happen. We saw it happen. I know that happened in the quarterfinals, from my understanding. We saw that happen. Sam Sutherland winning the Calling in Auckland prior to PT a few months ago, prior to the release of Outsiders, doing the same thing to 2 Dashes in top 8. So, as a deck, I think Dash always has the ability to do this. It has the tools. It's powerful. It has consistency. Maybe you need a little bit of luck on the day. I think this build in particular that Merrick kind of ran, this hybrid, I think is where you definitely need to be. I heard a little Freudian slip before. I heard you say Tree Frog Trash.
I did not say that, but
what it sounded like you said. I'm repeating what you said, but I think if you're going to be playing Dash in this meta, I think you've got to be on this. I really can't see how these super defensive decks can beat the Dromais and the Lexis of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, where do we go from here, Hayden? Because this deck won the tournament. Is this the deck you should be bringing to Road to Nationals? Honestly, it's not the deck I would bring, but I think if you just completely look past this deck and you don't test for it and you don't evaluate it against your gauntlet of decks you're potentially going to bring, then you're making a mistake, right? It at least needs to be in the consideration. It won the biggest class constructed tournament ever.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really what I do wonder is how many people were testing against this. Like Lexi players, how many Lexi players would make sure they're getting the reps in against Dash and understanding how to play the aggro side of that mirror? Because we kind of played a couple of games the other night, and then by the 3rd or 4th game, it was like, okay, there's a few really key things you have to understand about this matchup. And once you do, I think it does feel more Lexi favor than Dash favor, for instance. But I think if you're a Dash player and you have the reps under your belt, Dash is a perfectly reasonable pick for this Road to National season. I think, a list like Merrick's is teched. It looks like it's set up for this kind of meta. He understands the Dromai kind of side of it, plus the Ranger side of it, playing Command and Conquer, for instance, as a kind of dual popper / come Arsenal destroyer. And that could be a good way to set it up. Would I advise people to go and pick up Dash? I wouldn't think so. Not for Road to Nationals, even if you're not already experienced with it. I think it's probably there's other decks that are going to yield better results for you. So unless you really want to play Dash, or you are a Dash main or experienced Dash player, it's probably not where I'd be headed.
All right. On to other weird decks that made it in the top 8 of this calling. Let's talk about Viserai. So we have Zach Bunn's Viserai list. Some notable new cards and just cards I wasn't expecting. Crown of Dominion. I believe this is only on... I think he may have only played this on the play or the draw. I believe it's the play. But the main card here is it Deathly Duet or Deadly Duet? Deathly Duet.
Deathly.
Yeah, so Deathly Duet, the new card from Dynasty that says when Deathly Duet attacks, if an attack action card is pitched to play it, it gains +2. If a non-attack action card is pitched to play it, it gains, or you create 2 rune chance. So that's sort of the main new card in this list. Other than that, looks stock standard. There are 2 Ninth Blade of the Blood Oaths, which is, that's interesting. 3 Rattlebones as well. And then we do have the 1 Runic. But other than that, this is a sort of stock standard Viserai list, and then the cash-ins that I assume go with the Crown of Dominion game plan.
Yeah, so we saw this kind of idea of cash-in or Royal Viserai first come out and be seen at the Calling in Auckland prior to the release of Outsiders. We saw it from Yuanji, and I believe Brody actually played it in that event as well. Mm-hmm. I think Yuanji ended up sort of salvaging a pretty reasonable day 2 and cashed. I think Brody, he played the Battle Hardened, so I think Brody didn't day 2, but we saw a few of those players from the US travel and play this deck, and the interaction obviously really powerful. You think about a Viserai deck that can basically cast a free non-attack action that's going to draw cards, obviously triggering the ability, allowing you to have these really big turns. So, in the past we'd seen maybe people even shy away from cards like Rune Flash a little bit, whereas that's come back in the list like Zach's running here. So my understanding is probably he'd be running the Cash-in Royal sort of package in the aggro matchups. I think probably regardless of play or draw, they'll be interested to find out. Maybe they found something else out that kind of you only want to play it one way. I'm not sure what that was and what matchups that looked like. Because Crown of Providence obviously really powerful and something you probably particularly want into some, maybe a matchup like Lexi for defensive value. In terms of the Deathly Duet package, I think, previously we'd seen people play like the Rainbow, the 9 Shrill of the Skull form. I think Red Deathly Duet easily sort of can give you an upgrade opportunity on Yellow Shrill of the Skull form and actually give you the ability to potentially represent 1 more damage than a red could, depending on what your turn looks like. If you're having these really big turns, especially with something like Cash-in, to have these really massive, like 6 or 7 card hands, you're obviously pitching 2 cards probably in that situation and getting full value off Deathly Duet to make sure that you can come in for the 6 damage plus the 2 rune chance. So that's kind of what this deck looks like. And then the kind of other packages like this Ninth Blade, Read the Runes, kind of more set up your package, I guess, against the Ultim plan.
Mm-hmm. Is this deck playable, Hayden? Because this is a deck that I would like to play.
Yes, it's definitely playable. I mean, I think what's interesting is this might be a potentially better current meta call than something like Briar, actually. Whereas I was really interested in Briar in the lead up to the PT. As I said, it's the deck I think I would have played. It's where I was leaning. It's what we talked about in the pod a couple of weeks ago. But this Viserai, Royal Viserai package, maybe this is better. You have a slightly better matchup into Dromai, probably. I would be worried about your Lexi matchup. I don't know what that looks like, but I think you can equally have a reasonable matchup into Ultim. So I can see why Zach did well with this. Is everyone going to be able to do well with this? I don't know. Is it the right deck to be choosing? I don't know, but it's definitely cool and fun, and I want to play it.
Yeah, I talked to Zach both before the Pro Tour and before the calling, and it sounded like he didn't give a shit if this was the right deck or the wrong deck to pick on the day.
No, definitely not.
He just wanted to make some rune chance. So, but if I was going into Road to Nationals weekend 1, which I won't be, unfortunately, because of Pittsburgh, and weekend 1 is definitely the most fun weekend because then you can get one of the biggest edges. This is probably the deck I would try to get to make work, because even though I do think a lot of players are familiar with some of the lines that you would play with, I do think there is a little bit of a surprise factor, and it just takes me back to a good time playing Viserai, just missing 1 key piece. Bless you, Scalata.
Pretty good one too. I will say, where I'd be starting if you wanted to play this is play some matchups into Lexi and just understand how that matchup looks. I mean, the one thing that this has going for it really is, you have some good on-hit effects. You have Moverian Skies, which is obviously fantastic. You have access to a deck that can play Command and Conquer easily. It's a bit more awkward in something like Briar often. You have these really punchy sort of lines with Revel and Runeblood. You obviously have the Royal package, and maybe that is enough, to actually race them and present these on hit. The thing with Lexi, is that they're on hits, I guess more damage, right? That's the kind of thing we talked about. And their disruptive elements are lesser than, say, when you used to play against Ice Lexi. So I think Viserai, really interesting. Obviously, Icelander on the massive decline. It could be a deck to take. I'm definitely going to play some games with it. If I could play Viserai for Road to Nationals, I would love to. I wouldn't say it's on my shortlist for taking to Singapore, but there's time for things to change.
Yep, I'm particularly interested in it, to be honest. All right. So the last unusual deck to make it in, which is not that unusual. Let's talk about this Azalea list. Which looks pretty stock standard to what we've seen in the past. I think that Azalea going into the Pro Tour was potentially not well positioned due to the large amount of Oldhim that was expected, but as Oldhim potentially falls off due to its Lexi matchup, I think a lot of Oldhims look at Lexi as not the best matchup. Azalea can make its way back into the meta. I'm just looking at this list right now from...
Oh, there's a great card in there that you'll love.
Yep, the Sandscour Great Bow.
Yeah. It's a Sandscour deck, which is super cool. I think, I'm not surprised to see Azalea do well in this calling. I think actually we're talking to, friend of the show, Gabe. We were chatting the night before. He didn't unfortunately make day 2, and he was like, do I pivot off Azalea? And I was like, I think Azalea is a good pick for the calling. I think we're going to see a lot of Lexi. You're going to see aggro decks probably a higher percentage, and I think Azalea just a great call in general. But this deck in particular is super cool, and I think we haven't seen much of the Sandscour Great Bow interaction, but this deck, Jacob Kessel's deck here is very interesting and something that I think people should look to explore potentially heading into the Roast National season if they can find they want something a little bit different.
What does this deck do that's different from the normal Azalea deck that runs Death Dealer? Utilizing Memorial Ground with the Sandscour Great Bow to be consistent, or what does Sandscour Great Bow do that changes your general game plan?
Yeah, so while I guess Azalea is looking to, with Death Dealer, you can get the value out of that card, right? So you're looking to go tall, but you're not as consistently able to go tall, I would say, in kind of the same ways. And Deadeye is a particularly very powerful card. And with Sandscour Great Bow, you can make sure that you're always turning Deadeye on as opposed to Azalea having to flip it. And there's ways to add consistency, with Ops. And I think a card that people weren't playing, which I was really surprised about, is... the pump from the new set. Man, I'm terrible with names. Scout the Periphery, which I was surprised people weren't playing in their Azaleas already. So that's a way you can definitely do that. But then this just has all these pumps. It has just the on-hit effects, has Memorial Ground to give you the reliability, Spire Sniping as well, and just wants to make sure that every turn you go, okay, here's this disruptive arrow. So whether it's a Red in the Ledger, like we say with Memorial Ground, whether it's a even Heat Seeker for value, you can see options also of Barbed Undertow, which I think is another card that people should have been playing more of, and you can always make sure that has the counter on it. You're just going super tall with this relevant effect and just presenting a problem for your opponent every single turn. And of course, when you're placing that with Lace with Blood Rots, Lace with Inertias, you're potentially getting 2 to 3 different on-hit effects with these one arrows, which was a lot tougher in Death Dealer builds.
There's a Dreadbore in the sideboard. Is that for Oldhim?
I would assume that's kind of the way they're playing it. To get around unmovable sort of plans is just go with Release the Tension, Dreadbore sort of lines, and look to just go tall and just punch through enough damage through the course of the game with those turns.
Makes sense. Yeah,
it's a cool deck.
Yep, like I said, I think that Azalea potentially has a spot in the meta if Oldhim has a bit of a downtick post-PT, which is probably not going to happen because Michael Fang ended up being the one that won it. But keep in mind, there's only one Oldhim in the top 8 of that PT. And a lot of Lexis. But Calling's a different story. So 3 Oldhims in the top 8 of the Calling. We have Matt Rogers, Randall Sim, and David Lynn. Let me just open these lists real quick, Hayden, to see if they're particularly different. I'm mostly looking for a Fatigue Oldhim versus Temple Oldhim, which seems to be the standard. And
while you look at the lists and compare them, maybe you can have a little bit of a look. But I would just talk about Dave Lynn's list first, because this is the one that stood out as really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't play Rampart of the Rams head. Did Michael Feng actually play Rampart? I need to look at that as
Yes,
well.
he
I
did.
can't remember now. He did. Okay, so Dave, who is friends with good friends with Michael Feng, as I understand it, opted to not play the Rams head, just playing Stalagmite as his shield of choice, playing a much, I guess, more kind of streamlined build to a degree. I mean, there's more attack actions. He's got triple Endless Winter, triple Pulverize, Chokeslam Red, and then just a couple of defensive kind of silver bullets almost. There's one Piece of Mind in the deck, there's one Steadfast in the deck, and then the Staunch Responses for, I assume, these Go-Tool decks and Mirror Match, for instance. But yeah, a really sort of different sort of build. I mean, one of the only sort of ultimates we saw to play Heart of Ice and play a couple of AB. Some of them were just completely skipping on AB, assuming that Icelander was completely dead. We did see some people play Kano, but it was pretty small. So yeah, that was I thought a really interesting list. And then I know Matt Rogers' list was what Nick Butcher had played in the PT, and I don't want to butcher his last name, but Michael J from Canada, who I think finished 9th or 10th, so was on the bubble for top 8 of the PT, was also playing this 80 card list, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, so trying to find the difference between Oldham lists is like playing Where's Waldo, because they all have this like similar package.
There's a button for it.
Yep. David,
on February.
Yeah, David Lynn's list is quite similar to Randall's, to be honest. Randall does have 3 pummels, which is significantly more aggressive than 1 pummel in the list. But the most unique, I believe, is Matt Rogers' list, which runs a much more defensive package, has access to Sunkist, 2 Aces Respite, 3 Sink Below, 3 Sigil of Solace, and has 3 Zealous Beltings as well. I mean, this list, I know it's powerful, but if I look at it, I'm like, this list is all over the place.
It does look a bit like that. So one of the cool things, I don't know if for those that might use Fabry out there, a little plug for Fabry, love what those guys do, is there's actually a button when you can compare all 3 deck lists. I don't know if you're using this, but it just literally gives you the 3 lists side by side and then lists the cards that they are and aren't playing if you go scroll to the bottom of all the deck lists. But the interesting one, so for instance, like Randall Sims' list, he's playing like Crush Confidence, he's playing Red Disable, both in red, which is really interesting. Dave chose to play Chokeslam, which none of the other 2 decks play, all play 3 Command & Conquer in this meta. Endless Winter in Randall and Dave's list, but not Matt's, like you say. Glacial Footsteps out of Randall. So Randall's is a lot more red line focused with attacks. He looked a bit more proactive. Dave looked somewhere a little bit in between. He did have a few defensive options. And then, yeah, the Rogers list that we also saw played at the PT was a bit more defensive. And there's one Art of War that keeps cropping up. I don't know why these guys play Art of War, but
yeah, I wasn't even gonna bring that
it,
one
so.
up. I was like, I was like, I'm just gonna trust that they know why the single Art of War is in there. Yep.
One thing I do want to talk about, because we didn't really touch much on Michael Feng's deck list last week, but his Channel Lake Frigid is a card that we saw a lot of people not playing at this PT. The Ultims deciding to go without and removing the ice package, basically with the thought process that you just don't have the quantity of ice cards that you wanted. You need to play enough poppers in blue for Drone Ice, so walk away from this. But we did actually see Randall playing the package. I mean, it is good against Lexi, so I guess that makes sense. And maybe
good against Dromai for sure, right? Like Dromai, you're tempoing them off the turn. You're able to clear more dragons.
If you're playing aggressive.
Yeah, on that off turn. Yeah, I think that like the Dromai matchup against Oldhim, it really gets out of hand whenever Dromai has like multiple sort of pivot turns in a row where they're able to amass a board state that you just simply can't come back from. Like if you're able to keep the board at parity, it does feel like it gets into Oldham's favor as they go into the late game. So I think that something like CLF to slow those decks down, allow you to clear more dragons, is very powerful against Dromai.
Mm-hmm. What about the 2 Lexis? I mean, again, looking at these lists, Taylor Crawford coming in second here with Lexi, eventually losing to Merrick Kemp in this finalist event, looked pretty similar to what we see. I'd say the one piece of tech that we didn't see as much of is 3 down and dirty. So I think, really understanding from day 1 of the PT into day 2, which then was day 1 of the calling, wanted to have the tech for the Dromai matchup and coming with down and dirty, which I think is really interesting. Plus, then kind of, I think like actually this list to me looks like a real taking some lessons from the PT and this current meta and maybe adapting. And I think this maybe looks like the best list that I'd seen potentially of Lexi for the weekend. I mean, Matt Folk's list was so different. I don't think he played a single blue in his deck. It was really interesting comparative to the rest of the top 8 of the PT. But This list in particular looks quite well rounded to me. It has, some options for the mirror. It plays Frailty Trap, which I think is an amazing card in the mirror. It has access to 6 Codex, so Codex Finisher, amazing against Ultim, something I think you really need. Lightning Press, which is also good in those matchups. And then, of course, like I say, Down and Dirty, Death Touch, the kind of Dromai tech as well.
Yeah, and Matthew having 3 Lightning Surges in his deck, very surprising to me. At least initially, I know that they occasionally run the 1 to recur with Codex of Frailty. But yeah, Matthew, the one thing I want to bring up is the Quiver of Abyssal Depths. I actually talked to Brody today because it's pretty obvious what the use case for Quiver of Abyssal Depths is. But Brody was talking about he cut it specifically because he didn't think it was needed to beat Oldhim. Like, obviously, it's a luxury, but potentially with the right game plan, Quiver of Abyssal Depths is a bit redundant for Lexi, it seems. The Command and Conquer versus Down and Dirty conversation comes down to Command and Conquer having a dual utility in the Lexi mirror and being good in the mirror, where Down and Dirty is just limited to that Dromai matchup, pretty much.
Yeah.
And like you said, the Frailty Trap is, I think, the most interesting for me.
Yeah, I mean, Frailty Trap is a card that was, in my testing on my radar and felt like one of the best cards in the mirror. And I was surprised to see people not playing it for the mirror, to be honest. So I'd love to hear sort of if anyone has thoughts on, why maybe they have different experience to what I had, but it was definitely a card that was overperforming in the mirror for me.
Yeah, if you want to see an interesting Lexi list, just plug to the deck that's coming up. But you can just go look at the list because it's online. But Brody's and his team's list had a lot of ice for the mirror and for the aggro matchups. Had 9 Winter's Bite, I believe, as well as Arctic Incarcerations with the Chilling Ice Veins in the main deck. Yeah. Which is very different from both of these lists. So, honestly, there's a lot of ways to build Lexi heading into the Road to National season here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not... People are talking about this meta being solved, and to a degree, maybe, the kind of top decks are really stepping up and standing apart. But in terms of what these lists look like, particularly for Lexi, I mean, we just saw 3 very different Oldhim lists. We've seen completely different Lexi lists. There's so many different options. I think as we go through this Road to National season, and maybe even as we get to Dusk Till Dawn, will we even see a settled kind of best Lexi? I don't think it will, because I think it's meta dependent.
It's a trade off, right? You're like trading off for what you're expecting the meta to be, right? Like you're getting rid of cards, like the Down and Dirties, right? Like I think every Lexi, if they had infinite spots, would play 3 Down and Dirty. Why not, right? But you trade off, you go, I'm going to go 0 Down and Dirty, just go Command and Conquer so I can have it in the mirror, as well as I think that's enough for Dromai. So I do think this meta, we talk about it being solved, right? But it's particularly interesting because a lot of these deck lists have to make those decisions. That's why we see this sort of disparity as we go between the two. If we call back to something like the chain meta, that meta was solved. There was a best chain deck, and then everybody else was wrong. I'm sorry. That's just how it is. In this one, these lists, these players are making sort of cognizant decisions that they want to go down on some tech cards to go up in others.
I mean, the card pool's bigger, and Razor Reflex.
Yeah, and there's more heroes, yeah.
The other thing as well, I think, is that I wanted to ask you a question actually, which I'll ask you in a second, because I know I've been told that I have to ask this on the pod by
Jesus Christ,
someone anonymous. So we'll get to that in a second. But I wanted to talk about the Ultim matchup quickly, because depending on which group of players you ask about the format being solved, they'll tell you different things. So yeah, format solved. Lexi's the best deck. It doesn't have bad matchups. It beats Ultim handily. Other side of it, well, Ultim's the best deck. It doesn't have bad matchups, and it's favored into Lexi. So or hey, Dromai is actually the best deck, because if you know how to play it, it beats almost everything and has the game into the aggro deck still. So it depends on who you ask where the format is solved, for instance. And some might tell you that maybe just Dash is the best deck. I don't know. Anyway, the question I want to ask is Down and Dirty. Obviously, our preview card for Outsiders preview season. There was some criticism that maybe we're a bit low on the card. And, we alluded to potentially in Dusk Till Dawn, the card really being something that we see played in a big way.
Bro, I fucking said that card is exactly what it is. Literally what I said, and by the way, Brian was giving me some shit for this on the weekend too. But in our video, I was like, yeah, it might be good against Dromai, but outside of that, it's not that good. It's not. It's a Dromai tech card, it seems like at this point. It does break the core tenets of the game, but outside of that, I mean, it's just for Dromai at this point. Maybe in the future, but I mean, nobody looked at that card and was like, "Yeah, this is gonna suck." When Dromai is the most popular deck, obviously, it's a good card.
No, I think
it's hands up.
Look, we're comparing it to Crown of Providence, all right? So, I mean, what do you want us to do? Anyway, Brendan, I mean, that's kind of the top 8 of the event. You know, really interesting to see, realistically, like 8 fairly unique decks, even though we have, four different heroes. What one can I count? 5 different heroes. Yeah, which is exciting to see. You know, this differentiation, how people are building decks, I think is really exciting. So I'm looking forward to Road to National season. I'm looking forward to seeing what people put out there. You know, is there something spicy? I mean, Sandscale, Great Bow Azalea. We haven't seen much of that.
Yeah, it's
Royal
weird.
Viserai.
A lot of these calling decks are going under the radar. Like, I haven't heard anybody talk about them, to be honest. I think there's people are hyper focusing on the PT decks. Yeah. And I know when maybe Michael just does this, to be fair. Maybe Michael Fang just does this. When I talked to him, I was like, how do you feel about your bracket? He was like, terrible. I was like, okay. He was not happy to be paired in the Jermaine Lexi. I was like, dude, the whole tournament is Jermaine Lexi. Why did you bring Oldham? And he's like, I didn't. It's my backup deck. I was like, okay. For me, Hayden, I just want to play a deck that I enjoy. That's also good. You know, I just want to have my cake and eat it. But honestly, I think at this point, at a Road to Nationals, because I don't know if I'm going to be playing US Nationals, I would play a tier 1 instead of tier 0 deck if it was spicy and if it was fun. Where I think in the past, I would have just been like, give me the tier 0 deck. I don't care. Just the best deck in the room.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I'll let you know what I find for you. But I mean, so far, my testing hasn't turned up anything super interesting, although it's only been 3 days. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to test out that Viserai list for sure. But
me too.
Looks a bit boomer-esque to me, so I don't know if it's gonna hold a modern day FAB. Maybe Kano. Yeah. Kano Road to Nationals. Yikes.
Best of luck to you, my friend.
No.
All right. Episode 109 of Arsenal Pass. The Calling Baltimore was... I'm excited to see, can we top 1,000 players at the next Calling? I think that's obviously the next milestone for Flesh and Blood, but a huge event to cap off an amazing weekend. There was also a Battle Hardened, which I believe was won by Icelander, a last hurrah to Icelander before it headed out of the format. We have a new Blitz format coming up. Road to National season kicking off this weekend. Good luck to all those playing. If you want to find myself or Brendan, we are on Twitter at BrendanAPG, at Finn_Dale. If you aren't already subbed to the YouTube channel, please do so. Throw us a like on these videos. It really does help a lot. And of course, a big thank you to all the Arsenal Pass patrons. We do have, like Brendan was saying, more deck techs going up. There was, last month we threw up like another draft video for Outsiders, which might help heading into the Road to National season for those heading to draft events. I'm looking forward to playing some draft as well at Road to Nationals. But Brendan, otherwise, until next week.
See y'all.
See you next one.